we go.
Okay, great. Do you see this?
Yes.
Okay, well then I'll start. Yeah, I think the talk will, I actually haven't held it yet. I think probably 30 to 40 minutes, but yeah, feel free to ask questions in between. I think we have lots of time for those. Okay, so I'll talk about our paper, Guided Speculative Inference for Efficient Test Time Alignment of LLMs. This was in collaboration with Yusuf from IBM Research and my advisor David here from Harvard. And okay, to kind of motivate the problem, we're given an LLM, which we call PyB, and we want to do inference with this LLM. So we're given a prompt by the user, some input prompt X, and we want to use the LLM to generate an output prompt Y, output response Y. And what we're also given is a reward model. So reward models rank responses generated by LLMs. They tell you how good the response is. And we're also given a small language model. So that's what we call our main language model PyB, the small language model PyS. And we somehow also want to use this small language model to speed up the inference with PyB because we're in the setting where PyB is just really large and inference with PyB is very expensive, so we want to make it faster. And what the overall, well, algorithm or structure of the algorithm will look like in the end is this, that when we are given an input prompt X, we use the small model to generate responses because that's faster than using the big model. And then we use the reward model and also the big model to kind of rank the responses generated by the small model and pick the best one. And then that will be our response Y. Okay, so to give an outline of what I'll talk about, first, some background. So I'll briefly talk again about reasoning models and process reward models, PRMs, which is a certain type of reward model for LLMs. For those who are not familiar with that, I'll explain the KL regularized objective, which aligns the outputs of a language model to a given reward model. I'll also talk about speculative decoding, which is an idea for language models where you use a smaller language model to speed up the inference with a larger language model. Then I'll talk about our algorithm, GSI, Guided Speculative Inference, derive the algorithm and show that this algorithm comes with theoretical guarantees, and then talk about experiments and give a quick outlook for like future research. Okay, so for the background, yeah, I don't know, maybe everyone is familiar with reasoning models, but for those that are not, a reasoning model is a certain type of LLM that is kind of trained to perform chain of thought reasoning. So instead of like given a math problem, for example, just generating a response, what the reasoning model will do is it generates the response step by step. So it's trained to generate the first logical step and the kind of deriving the answer, and then based on that, derive the second step and so on until it gets a final answer. And then process reward models are special reasoning models for LLMs that are trained to compute rewards for each reasoning step of a reasoning model. So you might have heard of outcome reward models, which are reward models that, given a prompt and a complete response, tell you how good the response is. But these process reward models can also tell you how good each step in the reasoning trace of a reasoning model is. So yeah, for like step 1 and step 2, this will give us a score. So the reward model literally just outputs a number usually, and that number tells you how good is the step. Yeah, okay, so now let's jump into this KL regularized objective and also some notation first. So I'll denote the big model and the small model as PyB and PyS. So given some input X, these are distributions over the vocabulary size of the model. The reward model takes as input a prompt X and also some Y, which can either be a complete response or also just a number of reasoning steps, since we'll deal with PRMs. And now the goal is that we want to sample from the policy that maximizes this objective here. And what this objective says is we want to maximize the rewards in the responses that we generate. So that's this part here. We're looking for a policy that maximizes the expected reward, while at the same time we want to minimize the KL, so the Kullback-Leibler divergence between our distribution pi and the base distribution pi b. And why are we interested in this objective? This just means we want to generate responses with high rewards, but we also want to generate responses that are not too far from our base model pi b, because we know pi b is a good model. We don't want to move too far from it. But at the same time, we want to generate responses that have higher rewards than just generating responses from pi b directly. And you can see if this temperature here, beta, if this goes to infinity, this term goes to zero. So in that case, we only care about the rewards. If beta goes to zero instead, this goes to, sorry, I might have just said it the wrong way around. If beta goes to infinity, this goes to zero. We only care about the rewards. If beta goes to zero, this goes to infinity, and then we only care about the KL, and then we will only generate responses according to pi b. So if we choose a good beta, this will give us something in between. And then it can be shown that the solution to this problem actually has a closed form, the so-called tilted distribution, which looks like this. We'll call it pi beta b because it also depends on this parameter beta. And the tilted distribution is a distribution over pi b, as you can see here. But instead of just pi b, we tilt pi b by this term e to the beta r. So this tilting moves pi b into regions where the rewards are higher. And then we also need to normalize this to actually turn it into a distribution. Yeah, so it's called tilted distribution because it tilts pi b towards higher rewards. But the issue is that this is intractable. In our setting, since we're working with reasoning models and PRMs, we will always generate a reasoning step at a time. So a reasoning step usually consists of like multiple sentences, so like tens of tokens. And that means we can't estimate this normalizing constant here, because for that we would have to generate all possible reasoning steps in order to be able to estimate this normalizing constant. So this distribution is intractable. Yeah, are there any questions up to this point? No? Okay, then I'll keep going. Okay, so just maybe to recap, so the goal in the end is we want to sample from something that is ideally close to this distribution, but that's also fast. And getting this point, maybe there are a few questions. First, how do we make sampling from this distribution actually tractable? Because currently it's not. And then also, how do we use our reward model? And also, how do we use the small model, which I haven't really mentioned. And the answers to these questions are, for the first two, we use soft best of n sampling. For this last one, we do something that's similar to speculative decoding. And yeah, if you're not familiar with these terms, I'll also explain them now. So soft best of n sampling is the following. So again, the goal is we want to sample from this tilted distribution. And we can approximately sample from this as follows. So in each step, we generate n responses from the big model pi b. Then we compute the rewards for all of those responses using our reward model. And then we sample from a weighted softmax over these rewards. So we weigh by this temperature beta, and then we sample a response based on the softmax over these rewards. And if you do this, you can show that the KL between the distribution that you get from the sampling procedure and the tilted distribution up here is bounded by this term. And in this term, you can see there's a 1 over n. So this means if n goes to infinity, this goes to 0. So this shows that if you sample using the soft best of n sampling and you increase n, then you get arbitrarily close to samples that come from this tilted distribution. Yeah, so this gives us a way of actually sampling from this tilted distribution, or approximately sampling from it, even though we cannot directly sample from it because it's intractable to directly sample from it. Yeah, the only issue here is that, oh, okay, wait, first this slide. Okay, so how does this look like in the setting where now we have reasoning models and PRMs as reward models? So then we just loop over the reasoning steps. So we start with an empty response, and then T indexes the reasoning step here. So for each reasoning step until we reach the end of sequence EOS, we generate in responses. We compute the rewards with those with our PRM, and then we sample on these rewards tilted by the temperature beta. We append the sampled reasoning steps to our current response, and then we repeat. Yeah, the only issue with this is that this is expensive if pi b is large. So we could do this to sample from this tilted distribution, but ideally we want to do something faster. And that's where our small model pi s comes into play. So to explain how we use pi s, I'll explain what speculative decoding is for those who don't know this. So the main idea in speculative decoding, so I just took this image from this website here. The target model corresponds to what we call pi b. Draft model corresponds to what we call pi s. And if you want to do inference from the target model, if you want to generate responses, you would have to do that auto-regressively. That means for each new token, you need one new forward pass through your model. And in speculative decoding, the idea is that instead of having one forward pass through the target model for each new token, you instead generate gamma tokens auto-regressively with your small model. And then you can verify all of those in parallel with the big model. And this will give you between 1 and gamma plus 1 tokens that provably come from the distribution of the big model with just a single forward pass through the big model. So what this looks like in code, we don't have to go through all the details, but yeah, essentially, for each iteration of speculative decoding, what you do is you generate gamma tokens auto-regressively from the small model. That's lines 1 to 4. And then once you have these tokens generated, so this will be the tokens y1 to y gamma, you can feed the prompt x and this entire response y1 to y gamma into your big model in parallel. And this will give you, for each of the tokens generated with a small model, this will give you the distribution for the next token under the big model. So in particular, this will also tell you for each token that the small model generated, how likely would it have been to be generated under the big model? Yeah, so that's this. So we have gamma forward passes through the small model. We only have one forward pass through the big model. And then what we do down here, this, if you know how rejection sampling works, this is essentially rejection sampling, just that you do this for like k tokens in a row. Yeah, we don't have to look at the formula here in detail, but essentially what this does is it provably samples a number of n token. So it samples, it selects a number of n tokens from these gamma tokens that the small model generated. And the way it selects them is such that it provably selects these according to the distribution of the big model. So you will get n will be between 1 and gamma, and these n tokens will provably be sampled from the distribution of the big model, even though you generated them with a small model. And then what's also nice about speculative decoding is that in the end, you can sample an additional token from this distribution pi dash, p dash. And this ensures that no matter how many samples you accept from the small model, you will always generate an extra token from the big model. So even if you don't accept any samples, you still get one token from the big model with one forward pass through the big model. So yeah, overall, this means gamma forward passes through the small model, one forward pass through the big model, and you generate between 1 and gamma plus 1 tokens from the big model. Yeah, does that make sense? Are there any questions? Okay.
I had one question, Jonathan. How do you parse like these reasoning trays into individual steps that are sensible?
You mean here for speculative decoding, or?
No, just for the PRM scoring. So it's a stream of tokens, and then you need to somehow split it into logical steps.
You mean like how, like given a part of the response, how do you split that into reasoning steps, or?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, a good question. So the way that these reasoning models are trained is there is a special like end of reasoning step token, just like these models also have like an end of sequence token.
Hmm.
So the model is trained to whenever it thinks this is like a logical step, it generates an end of reasoning step token. And that's how we can also just sample a reasoning step at a time. So if I say that I sample a reasoning step, then you just keep sampling until you generate an end of reasoning step token.
Understood.
Okay. Yeah, good question. Okay, but yeah, also so the speculative decoding that I showed here, in this form, this is on a like token level, not on a reasoning step level. Um, what we will do in the end with GSI is kind of converting this to like a per reasoning step level. Okay, so this is the background on the KL regularization, on speculative decoding. Now the question is, why did I talk about all of this? How does all of this come together? And yeah, now I'll explain our algorithm. So again, to recap, what we want in the end is to sample ideally from this tilted distribution, pi beta b, um, which, like we said, A, it's intractable, B, it's expensive to even just sample from pi b. Um, and now what we can see is that this tilted distribution here, this term, pi b tilted by the exponentials over this normalizing constant, we can rewrite this as follows. We can rewrite this as a distribution over pi s instead, where the exponential now not only contains this b times the reward, but also um, the log ratio of pi b minus pi s. And I mean, you can see if you pull out this log ratio out of the exponential, then you just get pi b over pi s. Multiply that with pi s, the pi s cancels out, you get pi b. So yeah, it's immediate that these two terms are the same. But what's nice about writing it like this is that now it's a distribution over pi s. So if you remember when I showed you how softmax of n sampling works, um, this works and this provably gets close to this tilted distribution because we can sample from this distribution pi b, but then we weigh the samples by these exponentials here. So now we can do the same thing. Now we can generate samples from pi s, but now we weigh them by these exponentials here. So the exponential changes. So we weigh the samples we generate from pi s by the exponential of beta times the reward plus this log ratio. And then similar to how you can show that for normal softmax of n sampling, you can get arbitrarily close to the tilted distribution if you increase n. We can also show if we do this and we increase n, then we again get arbitrarily close to this tilted distribution. Are there any questions about this? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show this picture again to get, again, a better sense of what will be going on in our algorithm, which I'll show on the next slide. So what we overall, the overall picture is what we will do is, given a prompt X, we will generate n responses from the small model. And then using the reward model and the big model pi b, then we can compute these we will call them tilted rewards, the reward plus this log ratio. So given the responses generated from the small model, we use the reward model and pi b to compute these tilted rewards for the responses from the small model. And then we can rank them according to these tilted rewards. And then based on these tilted rewards, we can choose a response from the responses generated by pi s. Yeah, and again, we will do this like per reasoning step. So what this looks like in our algorithm is this. Yeah, so I'll go through it. So again, we're given the base model pi b, the speculative model pi s, our process reward model r, this temperature beta, which is larger than 0, also a threshold u, which I'll get to in a second. N is the number of responses we generate in each step, and X is our prompt. And then what we do is we start with an empty response to X, Then we loop again over the reasoning steps. So here T indicates the reasoning step. So in each iteration in this for loop, we generate reasoning steps. And we do this until the last reasoning step generates an end of sequence token. We sample n reasoning steps from the small model. So here as input to the small model, we use our prompt plus the response we generated up to that point. We sample n new reasoning steps. We compute these tilted rewards. So this is here different from last slide here. This is divided by beta. So now the tilted reward is R plus 1 over beta times this log ratio. And then the beta shows up here again. Yeah, so we compute the tilted rewards for the reasoning steps generated from the small model. We compute the tilted rewards using the reward model and also using the big model. So, but here importantly, if we generate a reasoning step, which again usually consists of like tens of tokens or even hundreds of tokens, if we generate them with a small model, we need to do that autoregressively. So for each token, we need a new forward pass. But here, if we compute the log probability of this reasoning step under the big model, also here instead of x, this should always say x and y. That's a typo. So if we compute the log probability under the big model, then we can do this with just a single forward pass, right? So this is why this is cheaper than generating the response with a big model. So once we have these, which we call tilted rewards, we can sample an index again from these tilted rewards. Now, what I said earlier showed that essentially we could stop here. We could just sample an index from these tilted rewards and choose that reasoning step as our next reasoning step. But what we found to work better in practice is that we add some rejection step, which is this part here, line 7 to 14, which essentially just says if the reward that we sampled is larger than some fixed threshold u that we input into the algorithm, then we accept the step. Otherwise, it means that maybe the response that we generated is not that good. So if the sampled reward is smaller than u, then we fall back onto the big model, and then instead we generate n reasoning steps from the big model. We compute the rewards from those, we sample an index according to these rewards, and then we use that reasoning step instead. Yeah, and then we just loop over this until the response is complete. So yeah, this is maybe a lot to digest. Are there any questions about this?
Yeah. Another question from me. So I understand that you generate a full reasoning step and then score that with right. But the small model is generating a different distribution, right? Wouldn't the big model have rejected it in the meantime? Like it's after 5 tokens or 6 tokens would have rejected, or rejection sampling would have rejected that step early.
Do you mean, where do you mean rejected exactly? Do you mean that, I don't know, like this log prop under pi b would just be much smaller than this one, or do you mean here in this step, or?
As in speculative decoding would have used a rejection sampling. It would have already thrown out the trace or that step after 10 tokens, let's say, because they diverge, I think.
Yeah. Or you
Yeah,
mean like
right.
normally speculative decoding, you would not get something like
Yeah, yeah.
accept a full step
So
at
I
a time,
wonder
right?
why does it now work to sample 100 tokens in a
Yeah,
step?
oh yeah, that's also a good question. So yeah, I mean in speculative decoding, yeah, what people usually use in practice is something like, I don't know, gamma equal to 3, 5, 7, I think are like common values. So you sample like between 3 and 7 tokens at a time.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, like you're totally correct that like you won't be able to do speculative decoding with like an entire reasoning step at a time. This will definitely get rejected. Um, but I mean, unlike in speculative decoding, in this case, we don't get exact theoretical guarantees. Like we're not saying that this will exactly sample from the distribution of the big model. But you will get something like what I showed earlier for the soft passive n sampling, where like if you drive n to infinity, then you recover the distribution that you want. But yeah, this will not exactly sample from the right distribution.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Um, Yeah. I mean that's just not feasible for reasoning steps. Yeah, I'll also show the theory in a second. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, maybe this will also make your question a little more clear. So yeah, we're able to derive some theoretical guarantees for this under what we call the coverage assumption. So the coverage assumption just says that any response that can be generated under the big model can also be generated under the small model. Yeah, because otherwise things are not going to work out. But also this is a reasonable assumption in practice. And then we show two results. The first one is that under this coverage assumption, we show that for arbitrary epsilon larger than 0, if we choose n large enough, I mean, forget about this term, just n large enough, we can show that the distribution that we sample from, so this distribution here denotes our algorithm, but without the rejection step in the end. Yeah, we can show that for arbitrary epsilon larger than 0, if we choose n large enough, the KL between this distribution and the tilted distribution is bounded by epsilon. So this means, yeah, this is kind of what I just said. If we let n go to infinity, then this distribution gets arbitrarily close to this tilted distribution. This is our algorithm without the rejection step. I mean, so what we have here in the rejection step is that we do soft passive n sampling from the big model, which I already showed previously that this provably gets arbitrarily close to the tilted distribution. So if we add the rejection step, you can also derive something similar. But this shows that even without the rejection step, the distribution that we get from our algorithm, so sampling from the small model, computing these tilted rewards with the log probabilities in them, and then sampling based on these rewards, this gets arbitrarily close to this tilted distribution if we make n large enough. And then, so this is kind of a guarantee on the distributional level. So this tells us that the distribution that we sample from is close to the distribution that we actually want in the end, this tilted distribution. Another result that we showed is the following. This is for the expected rewards that we're getting. So here this even holds for a golden reward. So what people usually mean with golden reward is kind of like a ground truth reward that you don't know. So you can assume that the reward model that you're using, like the PRM, is maybe not perfect. So it gives you approximate rewards, but this is maybe not the ground truth reward that's unknown. So even if you use the ground truth reward here to compute the expected reward, then under this coverage assumption, we show that the expected golden reward under the tilted distribution minus the expected golden reward under our distribution. So here this is this denotes the distribution from our complete algorithm, including the rejection step. This goes to 0. But yeah, you could also plug in our reward model here if you wanted to. But even for this golden reward, we essentially show that if n goes to infinity, in terms of the expected reward, we get arbitrarily close to the expected reward under this tilted distribution. Are there any questions about the results, the theory? Okay. Yeah, so to recap the algorithm that we derived, I'll just show the algorithm again. We combine these ideas, soft passive n sampling, with ideas from speculative decoding, although, as you also just mentioned, this is not exact speculative decoding. Think about it as like approximate speculative decoding, because you can't do exact speculative decoding in the setting, yeah, where you generate reasoning steps and also where you're given this reward model and you're trying to align to the reward model because your target distribution is not tractable. But yeah, using these ideas, we derive this algorithm where we use a small model to generate responses that are generated faster than if we were using the big model. But by computing these tilted rewards, we can show that provably we recover a distribution that gets arbitrarily close to the tilted distribution that we ideally want to sample from in the end. Okay, so now let's look at the experiments. So yeah, this was just a workshop paper, so we didn't run too many experiments on this paper, but we're also working on turning this into like a conference paper, so there will be more experiments coming soon. But so what we did here was as models, we used these Gwen math instruct models. So these are math reasoning models. The small model has 1.5B, the big model has 7B parameters, and the PRM that we're using is also this Gwen PRM with 7 billion parameters. Yeah, we implemented everything with the LLM, if you know this, so that it runs fast. The parameters that we're choosing, so beta, this temperature that we use to kind of scale the rewards in the softmax, we set it to 20. The threshold that we use in the rejection step is 0.5. So the rewards from this PRM lie between 0 and 1. So 0.5 is right in the middle. The temperature for the sampling is 0.7, and then top P from the sampling parameters for the LLM is equal to 1. And the methods we compare is our algorithm, both with and without this rejection step, just to see how much the rejection step affects the results. Then RSD, which stands for reward speculative decoding, I think, which is this other paper that proposes a similar idea. Although what they do is they don't compute these tilted rewards, they only compute the reward directly from the reward model, and then accept or reject based on this reward. And what this does is that it doesn't give you any distributional guarantees because you're only looking at the reward. You don't know if the distribution that you sample from is actually close to the distribution that you want to sample from in the end. The only thing that this guarantees is you can derive like a bound on the expected reward that you get in the end, but you don't get any distributional guarantees. And then we also compare to a soft best of n with both the small model and the big model. Yeah, and this is the results in some reasoning task where we ran this. So we ran this on 3 reasoning data sets, Math 500, Olympiad Bench, Minerva Math, which are mostly like mathy questions that have clear answers. So yeah, usually the answer will be something like a number. So you can check if the response generated or the answer generated by the model is correct or not. And yeah, so across the 3 data sets, the results look a little different. So you can see, okay, so here this green is our algorithm, but without the rejection step. Orange is with the rejection step. Then this is soft best of n with the big and the small model. And this is RSC from this paper that I mentioned. You can see on Math 500, for example, that our algorithms, both of them, get close to the performance of soft best of n with a big model. So again, like soft best of n with a big model is kind of like the gold standard, the upper bound. But we don't want to do this because it's expensive. So the ideal result would be that our algorithm gets very close to soft best of n with a big model. On Math 500, you can see it even is slightly better than that, which is maybe a bit surprising. On Minerva Math, this plot's maybe the one that makes most sense. So with the same parameters as they used in this paper, the RSD actually performs very similar to soft best of n with a small model across all 3 data sets. Our 2 algorithms lie somewhere in between soft best of n with a small model and soft best of n with a big model. And then the soft best of n with the big model is this upper bound. The plots for Olympiad Bench, I think they just look like this because for some reason the models that we chose, the smaller model is actually better than the bigger model on this data set. So yeah, this just, I guess, shows that this can also happen. So that's why here the best performing, so here you can see that soft best of n with a small model is actually the best, and soft best of n with a big model is the worst. So yeah, maybe this just shows that just because you increase model size doesn't always mean you're better, but yeah, the most telling, I guess, are these 2 data sets here. We also have this in numbers again. So here, yeah, I mean, maybe also what I should have mentioned here. So here we increase on the x-axis n, the number of samples that we generate in each of the steps. So we increase n from 1 to 256. Yeah, I think one nice thing that you can also see here on this plot is that as we increase n, the performance of our algorithm without the rejection step actually approaches the performance of the complete algorithm with the rejection step, which kind of like empirically validates the theory that we had, that as n increases, we get closer to the tilted distribution. Yeah, so that's nice to see. Yeah, these are the numbers again, if you want to look at them. Yeah, like you saw on the plot already, in Math 500 and Minerva Math, our algorithm is outperforms RSD and self-SFN with a small model. On the Olympiad bench, it's the other way around because, yeah, I guess that's just due to the small model being better here. But yeah, overall, both for n equal to 16 and n equal to 64, GSI approaches the performance of soft-SFN with a big model. And I mean, why we do this instead of just doing soft-SFN with a big model is what this table shows. So here we measure the inference time in seconds per reasoning step across different methods. And you can see here soft-SFN with a big model is always significantly higher. And our method is closer to the time needed by soft-SFN with a small model. So yeah, it strikes a balance between inference speed and accuracy. Okay, that was it for experiments. So are we on time? 45 minutes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, okay, there's not much on this slide, but I think future work what's probably, I think, interesting. Well, you can scale this to larger n, you can derive tighter bounds for the theory. Some of the bounds that we have are quite loose. Maybe what would also be interesting is to see if you can apply this to different domains, maybe diffusion models. Yeah, I think what's most interesting maybe is to move beyond reasoning tasks. So for example, when you have, so what we're looking at now, the reward models, they kind of just tell you if the response for like a math problem that you have is correct or not. But you can also have different rewards, like safety rewards, for example, where the reward tells you how safe is the response generated by the model. And I think that are probably settings where this algorithm would actually excel even more than in reasoning data sets. Because for reasoning data sets, I think the reward models that are out there that people use already give you a pretty good idea of if the response is good or not. So actually what this other method here, this RSD, is doing, where they only look at the reward and don't care about the log probabilities under the two models, is probably good enough. Just because the reward models are pretty good, but I think in other settings where, yeah, say you care about the safety, the reward models tend to not be that good, and then you can run into what's called reward hacking, where the responses, when they care too much about the reward, they get too far from your base distribution. And I think that's probably where this will be even better. Yeah, that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Can I ask you directly a question? So, because I am familiar with just with best of n sampling, but the hard
Mhm.
version, just like sample a
Yeah,
thousand
yeah,
and just take the best one. So maybe I think you've spoken about this, but what is the disadvantage of using this compared to using a soft sampling, or
yeah,
what
yeah.
you propose?
Thanks for saying that because I wanted to mention that and then I forgot to mention it. Yeah, so like I said, just so everyone's on the same page here, there's like normal best of n sampling is you generate these n responses, you compute the rewards, and then you just pick the sample with the best reward. And then you don't need the sampling step at all. And here instead, what we do is we compute this distribution over the rewards. And I mean, you can also see this beta controls how hard or soft you want this to be. So if beta goes to infinity, you will choose, like for beta going to infinity, this exactly recovers hard best of n. For smaller betas, like if beta goes to 0, this will just give you a random choice amongst all the samples. And yeah, the advantage of doing this over hard best of n, there's also some, I think that's also in this paper here, that shows that if you do a hard best of n, then this relates to what I just talk about in the end, like in settings where your reward model is maybe not perfect, you can get this behavior of reward hacking. So especially, yeah, in settings where your reward model is maybe not ideal and where you have large values of n, you will kind of the intuition is for large values of n, you will always get some responses in there that are actually not good responses, but that for some reason the reward model ranks very high. And then if you just pick the response with the highest value all the time, then you get what's called reward hacking is where you maximize the rewards, but actually the responses that you generate diverge from your base distribution. And yeah, they're just not good responses anymore. And if instead you sample from this distribution that to some degree can mitigate this issue. So yeah, that's one point. Another point is, I guess, this also, like from a theoretical point of view, makes things nicer. So for soft best of n, you can show this bound. For hard best of n, you don't get this bound. So yeah, I guess this tells you if you do soft best of n, then you know from theory, even if you increase n, things will be good. Versus yeah, if you do hard best of n, things can deteriorate if you increase n.
Thanks. Makes
But
sense.
yeah, I mean, there are also definitely settings where hard best of n works better. I think this depends a lot on your beta and on your n, and also on the models that you're using. Yeah, so one can be better than the other.
Yep.
Any other questions?
There are, I forgot to say it. If anybody had questions, they could write it in the chat. Otherwise, now is the time. In the meantime, just one question that we like to ask is just like, what do you have any recommendation of any paper or technology or something that interests you that you'd like to share with the rest of the listeners?
Any paper or technology? That's
Something that you find exciting right now.
a broad question. I don't know. There's many things I'm looking at right now. I mean, I think this whole like literature of aligning models to reward models is like, I don't know, very big right now. So, I mean, this work goes in that direction. There's lots of other works. I mean, for language models, you can do this both at inference as well as at training time, where like you have a reward model and you kind of use this to, yeah, at training time, train the model to generate responses with higher rewards, or at inference time to something like this. Yeah, like even for diffusion models, this is kind of like an exploding line of work, I guess, where you can also guide the generation and diffusion models according to reward models, to kind of generate like higher quality images. So you can have different reward models, like people train different reward models for different things that, I don't know, you want in images. Yeah, like you could train a reward model for diffusion to, I don't know, for example, like generate images of a certain style or something, and then you guide the generation of the diffusion model according to this reward model. Yeah, so I think like this idea of guiding models along reward models, but doing that in a smart way such that it doesn't like deteriorate performance. Yeah, I think that's something I'm looking at right now. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I think we can call it a day, and super happy to have you here. Thank you for presenting.
There was one. Oh, this was from earlier, right? Oh yeah, that was your question from. Okay, I didn't see that in the chat. But yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah, then thanks a lot for the invite, and yeah,
Yeah,
that was nice talking.
then have a nice
Thanks.
day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.